Well, to some extent, this is the easy part for me this morning. I hope that after you hear this, you may understand why Bev Gudex had a little bit of a startle reaction when she saw me here for the first time.
It's true.
It began on a dairy farm a few miles from Randolph. There was my dad, my mom, and a brother who was 5 years older. It was somewhat of an idyllic life, although I may not have realized it at the time. We were poor, but we did everything together. I actually believe that we ate every meal together. How many families do that? My father had a 6th grade education. He was a very hard worker. He loved farming, and he was a very staunch Republican. He never talked about religion, and I never knew exactly what he believed. The only time he ever said anything about religion is after one service that we were at. He said to me on the way home, "I'm not sure I believe all that stuff." My mother, on the other hand, was very religious. She was raised in the Christian Reformed tradition, which is a conservative Calvinistic faith. We read a chapter from the Bible at every meal. We actually worked our way through the Bible a number of times. We left out some of those chapters about so-and-so begat so-and-so. But we actually worked our way through the Bible several times. My mother also had me go to a Christian school where I learned the Calvinistic doctrine. And one of the ways I can summarize the Calvinistic doctrine is using the acronym TULIP. And I don't know if you're familiar with that, but here it is. And you might want to compare that to the 7 principles of Unitarianism. The T stands for total depravity, which means that humans in and of themselves can do no good. The U stands for unconditional grace, which means that you may be saved, but it's not due to anything that you have done. The L stands for limited atonement, which means that not everyone is going to be saved. The I stands for irresistible grace, because after all, God is all powerful. So if you are chosen, then you can't resist that. Irresistible grace. And then last but not least, perseverance of the saints, which means that once you're chosen, you're always chosen. Which led to a very interesting doctrine, the doctrine of election, which means that you're either elect or you're not. And good luck with that. In addition to my mother being very religious, she also had problems with depression. And if you believe the TULIP, I can understand why you might be depressed. At the age of 4, my mother went to a mental health hospital in Michigan, and she was gone for a period of time. I now understand that while she was there, she had electroconvulsive therapy, because that was one of the treatments at that time. When she returned home, because I was the youngest in the family, I spent a lot of time with my mother while my brother and my dad were in the barn milking. And at a very young age, I decided that it was my job to make my mother happy. And so I announced to my mother that I was going to be a minister. And of course, she communicated that to our extended family and to our church, and that became a very, very high expectation that I was going to be a minister. And so I went on to a pre-seminary education in a church college, and there was a problem. The problem being that I had never had a, quote, religious experience. And I was not sure that I really was called to be a minister. But I was afraid to tell my mother. And so I went from college, and I should say that while I was in college, I took my first psychology course when I was a junior, and I loved it. And I happened to have a professor who had graduated from Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, California, who encouraged me to go to that program. And so I applied, and I was accepted. Fuller had a 6-year program. The purpose of that program was to integrate psychology and religion. So you took all the courses you had to take to become a minister, and you also took all the courses you needed to get a PhD in psychology. I did not like being in LA. I was a farm boy, and still consider myself to be a farm boy. And so when I came back to Wisconsin, I was happy to be here, but I never told my mother that I did not want to be a minister. After all, I'd been in seminary for 6 years. And so fairly quickly, I developed what was called the Bethel Counseling Center, which was providing services for 26 churches in the Waupun, Sheboygan area. And it was quite successful, and during that time, I often filled the pulpit, gave what I called psychological sermons, which were pretty well received. It was successful enough that we had to divide up the program. After a couple of years, I decided that I could no longer continue the Bethel program. They had a 26-member board, and they were very controlling, and often it conflicted with my professional values, conflicted with confidentiality, conflicted with some of my morals at the time, and they sometimes wanted to control what I was telling the folks. And of course, it got back to the board sometimes what I was telling folks, and that didn't go over big either. So after a few years, I discontinued the counseling center. And I'm going to fast forward now because Sylvia told me that I only had 10 minutes. And I told Sylvia, well, that's okay, I can do this in 10 minutes, but I'll decide when the 10 minutes starts. So I'm going to fast forward to now, and I'm going to leave out the past 30-some years. But over that time, I have fallen away from that traditional Calvinistic faith. I've fallen away for a number of reasons. I'm not sure I can remember all of them, but number one was education. And as you become educated, you begin questioning what you've been taught. I also had difficulty with the idea that there was one way to salvation. And I had met a number of what I consider to be very, very good people, and they weren't religious at all. In fact, some of them were atheists or agnostics. And the idea that billions of people were going to be condemned to hell because they didn't believe what I did, I could not accept. There's a term for that. It's called the scandal of particularity, that only a very select group of people will be saved. And so those are the reasons, or those are some of the reasons. There's a lot more. One of the reasons was my wife, Maureen. She had a hard time believing the Calvinistic beliefs. And thank goodness that I am where I am now. So where am I now? Just a couple of things. First of all, I'm not sure what it means to be spiritual. When you've gone from believing in a personal God and now being close to being agnostic, that the meaning of what it means to be spiritual changes considerably. And for me right now, spiritual means finding a higher meaning in life. And I'll leave it at that. Part of doing this exercise, I realized that we are probably more determined than we think. I am a staunch believer in free will, but we don't choose who our parents are. We don't choose the religious faith that they have, that they pass on to us with all kinds of good intentions. And I very, very much love my parents. They were such good people. And I have found that it's okay to question. And now I can question and doubt and not have to feel anxiety and guilt. And that is a great, great feeling. And so, I believe that religions has grown out of uncertainty. Humans have difficulty dealing with uncertainty. And so they create things. But I have found, and I find it a little ironic, that in a group of what I consider to be kind of intellectual people, it's okay to say, I don't know. I've also come to the point of seeing life as a mystery, and that's okay. And therefore, out of that comes a sense of wonder, because how did this all happen? Wow. How did this all happen? And so, it's okay to say I don't know. Do I think there's a God? I don't know. If there is a God, I know that it's much more than what us humans have said God, have created God to be. Is there an afterlife? I don't know. certainly a hope. But again, if there is an afterlife, I think it's some form that we're not even entirely aware of. I'd like to close with a statement that I saw in our recent travel, and this was found in a Buddhist temple in Thailand, Pattaya, Thailand to be exact. I wasn't looking for this, but when I read it, it just kind of hit me in terms of, wow, that kind of catches where I'm at this point in my spiritual journey. This temple, by the way, was 340 feet tall. It was almost entirely made of carvings. There's not one nail in that temple. This work indicates that humans are only dust in the universe and will ultimately become one with it. Physical beings deteriorate, ravaged by the time, but truth and goodness are immortal. Materialistic pleasure is a superficial physical and external joy. True happiness is found in intrinsic spiritual pleasure. Ideals make humans more meaningful. Determination to go to the ideal world is something desired by all humans. Every belief, every religion, and every philosophy leads there by different paths. To ponder the great questions of heaven and earth and yet live for humanity. To study and teach the sublime knowledge of scholars of the past, and to create eternal peace for all humankind. This is the true goal and knowledge great humans strive to achieve.